Hi there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. I have a lot of finished quilt tops to finish, and I'm going to take you through a couple of those today and we'll see how much we can get done.
The first thing I have to tell you is that normally I sew in a closet space. When we downsized, I took the walk-in closet in the spare bedroom/office as my sewing space. And I have a sewing table that expands, and when I want to expand it, I have to move it out of the closet. Here you can see my expanded table. There's a gate leg on the right and a gate leg table on the back, so this does expand into a nice large work area. And I also have a little 5-foot table that I've carried around with me for years, and when I'm not using it, I store it under my bed. All right, let's talk about quilting. There are a lot of different ways to quilt and secure your quilt sandwich together. I use basting pins, the large size, and I'll put a link below to the ones that I'm using. And I also use this tool called Klip. I'll also put a link to that below. It makes closing those safety pins, those basting pins, much easier. I have some leftover pieces of batting, and I just wanted to show you it's pretty easy to get a straight edge on your batting if you have some scraps to put together, and just put 2 straight edges together, put a little zigzag stitch on it, and voila, you have a nice bigger piece of batting. Before I start pinning or sewing anything, I check the size of my project, I check the size of the batting I'm going to be using, and I checked the size of the backing I'm going to use. All the backing in this video I did have to piece together. It wasn't wide enough. It was a 45-inch width fabric, so I did have to cut it apart and sew 2 pieces together to make the backing big enough for my quilt. And there's no easy way to do it. You just have to measure, cut apart your backing, and figure out exactly how big the piece you're going to need is going to be. Sew some pieces together until you have the right size. Sometimes I will use a 108 width fabric as well, so I don't have to do any piecing of the backing. Once I have the sizes that I need, I went ahead and pressed thoroughly both my backing and my quilt top. And now it was time to lay this out on my table, make sure everything was centered and overlapping. And I made sure and smoothed out any puckers. My preference for using these basting pins, I have the pins about 6 to 10 inches apart from each other. Once my quilt top is all pinned, I do trim very closely to the edge of my quilt top. Since I'm doing this at home, I do not need an extra 4 or 6 inches, which I would need if I was sending this off to a long armor. I'm going to use different quilting techniques on the 2 that I'm showing you in this video. The first one, I'm taking off my normal foot that I use for everyday things, and I'm putting on a special quilting foot machine. It's a free motion quilting foot. I bought that at my local sewing machine store. They recommended it to me, and it is not the brand that came with my sewing machine. And before I get started, I do a little test patch with a piece of cotton, a piece of batting I'm using, and another piece of cotton. And this way I can make sure the height of this foot is proper. This machine foot has an adjustable height, so I can squish it down as low as I can, or I could make it higher depending on the thickness of my fabric sandwich, my quilt sandwich. And here you can see my finished little free motion squiggles and swirls. Okay, and now it's time to free motion this quilt. On this particular quilt, it is a panel quilt. So I started with one panel, then I went to the other panel images. The last thing I do on these is go around the border. I always save that for last. So you can see me squiggling around here, around the butterfly, around the caterpillar, doing just different free motion things. I didn't really have a plan. I just kind of went with it and did whatever I felt like doing. And at the end, I will show you how this turned out. I really love it. This is for my new grandson who's coming pretty soon. I think he's going to love this quilt as much as I do. Well, now let's get started pinning a different one. I am not going to do quite so elaborate a job of quilting on this one. So I just wanted to kind of take you through my process for doing an easier one. You can see this quilt is made up of columns of strips and circles. That's going to make it very easy for me to do straight line quilting, which is what I'm planning to do here. And once again, with quilting at home, there's really no need to have a lot of excess batting and backing around the edge because I'm pinning this in place, I'm quilting it myself, so I don't need that extra. My Singer modern quilter machine came with this walking foot that you see on the left. I'm going to swap out that free motion foot for this walking foot. And the reason you want to use a walking foot is because it has something equivalent to feed dogs on the top so that it works together with your quilt sandwich to pull the fabric through. And just like I did with my free motion foot, I went ahead and did a little test zigzag stitch and a test straight stitch so that I could make sure everything looked good before I actually started quilting my quilt. So to quilt this quilt with columns, I simply zigzagged between all my columns on the seam line. This was a very fast way to quilt my quilt. So in this session, I quilted 4 quilts. One of them was free motion, and that was the caterpillar quilt. The other 3 I did straight line zigzag stitch. On this quilt, I actually threw in a few wavy lines as well. I just did that with my walking foot and moved my fabric from side to side to make those wavy lines. Thanks for joining me today as I turned some quilt tops into finished quilt sandwiches. Join me again in a future episode and I will show you how I do binding and attach binding to my finished quilt. Most of all, have fun with your quilting projects, and I hope I see you back real soon.